A question I get all the time is which do you prefer, Paris or London? And honestly, my answer always disappoints people because I can't choose. Paris is my great love, but England might be my first love. The truth is, after spending lots of time in both places, lived off and on in Paris for many years, decades and decades of spending time in London. What fascinates me most isn't the museums or the monuments, it's the people, the habits, the culture, the little things you only notice when stop sightseeing, so to speak, and you allow yourself to get quiet and start to pay attention to the people. One of the reasons that I continue to live in Boston is that it's relatively easy to fly to either city. And also, Boston feels a little bit more European, to me, anyways, than many other American cities where I've lived. And so, Boston allows me to keep one foot in both worlds. So, today I'm going to share some of the things that I noticed, the differences in living, in both places, spending time in both places, but the differences I've noticed between Paris and London. Now, a disclaimer. Some of these may be absolutely right on and true. Some may be completely wrong, but they're what I've noticed. And I would love to know if you've noticed them too. So let's get started. Observation number one, Paris feels beautiful. London feels interesting. When I walk through Paris, I often think, oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. Whether it's a door, it's the wrought iron balcony across the front of a building, a window display in a shop, so unique. The houseman order and symmetry of the buildings, the roads, and the avenues, beautiful. Soft colored facades, we all know them, and large wooden doors that hide whatever I call it magic might exist beyond them. Whenever, I'm walking and I see someone going in one of those big doors or coming out of one of those doors, I either slow down or speed up a little bit just in the hopes that I get to peek inside. Then there are the flower shops, the most beautiful flowers that are often spilling out onto the sidewalks. There are cafes with beautifully dressed waiters, usually, and there's a consistency, but they're nicely dressed men. The beauty feels intentional in Paris, calming, almost effortless. London rarely gives me that feeling. It's a bit more higgledy-piggledy, if I use a British phrase. Georgian and Victorian homes with shiny black doors that open directly onto the street. They have garden squares, yes, but they are usually private to the homes that surround them. Neighborhoods somehow feel both historic and modern at the same time. And in London, I often find myself thinking, that is so interesting. I want to know the story behind that. Whether it's a tiny bookshop that is tucked down a side street or a pub that's been there for, 300 years. What is it all about? What's the story? So Paris feels like a painting. London feels like a novel. And depending upon the season of life you're in, you may need one more than the other. Or perhaps, like me, you need both. Observation number two, the French dress beautifully. The British, in contrast, dress like themselves. I noticed this again at the Chelsea Flower Show. French women are masters at editing. Everything works together. Everything feels intentional. I think it was Coco Chanel who famously said, before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take one thing off. Well, French style often follows that philosophy. British women, in contrast, seem more interested in personality, adding rather than subtracting. A bright jacket, a fabulous hat, a colorful dress, a pair of shoes that probably make no sense to anyone other than the wearer who actually loves them, but somehow it all works. And as I said, recently I attended the Chelsea Flower Show with Sharon Santoni and her tours, one of her tour groups. And from the flower show, we went up into the gardens of the Cotswolds. And I was shocked with what I had brought on this trip. I arrived feeling much more French than English. I quickly realized, to my chagrin, that what works beautifully in Paris doesn't necessarily work in London and certainly doesn't work up in the Cotswolds. I had taken Coco Chanel's advice to a whole new level. Beige, I was beige. Navy, a little more beige. Practical shoes, I even had my tennis shoes with me. Very little jewelry. Everything looked sensible, everything packed beautifully. And I did a video on what I packed. Meanwhile, I have to be honest and say I didn't feel particularly pretty. I didn't feel particularly feminine. The British women, in contrast, that I was walking past at the flower show and seeing in the pubs and the restaurants where I went, and even some of the women on my tour, they looked like they were celebrating the arrival of sunshine, flowers, color, interesting handbags, beautiful shoes, maybe a hat. At the Chelsea Flower Show, honestly, I look like a schoolmarm. I have never felt that way in Paris. In fact, the more subtle my clothing is in Paris, the more I seem to fit in. Simple, clean lines, elegant. The British, on the other hand, seem to delight in expressing more than a little personality through what they wear. And I found that very charming. Observation number 3. Summer means completely different things. This one took me a while to grasp, but absolutely fascinated me. In Paris, summer means people disappear. The city empties. Everyone heads to the countryside, the coast, family homes. Life pauses. You hear about la rentrée, the return in Paris when everyone comes back to Paris and school begins. It's almost as if the entire country of France collectively agrees to take one long, deep breath. London, the absolute opposite. Summer is the social season. Think about it. The Chelsea Flower Show, Wimbledon, garden tours, outdoor concerts, festivals, parties. People seem determined to enjoy every bit of sunshine, maybe because they know perfectly well it might rain tomorrow or turn cold tomorrow, and winter is just around the corner. I don't know, but I so love the difference. Observation number 4. The British value conversation. The French value privacy. This one took me years to notice. In Paris, I often feel that people's private lives remain private. Friendships run deep, but they're carefully protected. Many French people maintain friendships that they've had for decades. Their social circles seem established long before you, as an outsider, might have arrived. The French can be incredibly social, but their social interactions remind me a bit like their clothing: elegant, restrained, intentional. In England, in contrast, conversation feels almost like a national pastime. People are discussing books and gardens and the weather, dogs, politics, the trains being late, and somehow the weather again. One of my favorite evenings on this last trip was attending a book discussion at Hatchard's, which is my absolute favorite bookshop in London. If you go to London, you need to go to that bookshop. The people that attended that book discussion were warm, they were curious, thoughtful. No one seemed interested in impressing anyone. They were interested in ideas. So those Sunday roasts in the pubs, lunches with friends, people gathering outside pubs at 5 o'clock on a sunny evening, almost every night too, it all feels wonderfully social. And they're groups of people. I don't know exactly why this difference exists. because these countries are rather close to each other. Maybe it's history, maybe it's culture, maybe it's simply where I've spent my time, but I've consistently found British social life much more public and French social life much more private. Honestly, I have to say though, I enjoy both. Observation number 5. Books still matter in the UK. And maybe this is more of a UK versus a US comparison because I am not fluent in French, but this is an observation that is one of my favorite, and that is that bookshops are alive in London. Not just tourists taking the Instagram photos. There's a bookshop here in Boston. It's called, let's see, Beacon Hill Books on Charles Street that the Instagrammers have just taken over that place. They're not there to talk about books. They're talking about what they're taking photos of, which is kind of interesting. But there in London, people are buying books. People are talking about books. They're attending events. They're standing in line to hear authors speak. Perhaps that's why I love London so much. Decades ago, as I shared, my ex-husband and I used to go to England all the time. And I wrote in my journal, I happened to read some of my old journals. I do that sometimes when I travel. Before I travel to a particular location that I've been to before, I had written, and this was probably 30 years ago, that the people in England enjoy debating ideas and philosophies and politics in a way that even then in the US, people did not. Now, I don't quite know how that compares to France because I don't speak French fluently. So I don't think I'm really qualified to make a fair comparison. But London does feel like a city where ideas still matter. And for someone who loves books and discussions and lifelong learning, that's pretty hard to resist. Observation number 6. The food. Historically, French and British food were never in the same category. France is a food culture. Cooking is woven into daily life. Good ingredients, I have to say, are everywhere. Markets are everywhere. Meals matter. And meals, not just where you're refueling your body, but meals are part of the conversation culture. We spend time over a meal. We talk over a meal. Food is not treated as a hobby. And in fact, I'm amazed at how many French people actually know how to cook really well. It's sort of like the ability to tie a scarf beautifully. Somehow they just know. They know cooking and they know how to tie scarves. It is simply a part of, I think, enjoying life. England took a very different path. Historically, England was a far more industrial society. The Industrial Revolution actually happened in England. Food often needed to be practical, filling, and portable. Think sandwiches and pasties or little pies. These are meals designed for people who were working long days away from home. But British food has changed dramatically over the past decade plus. Some of the best meals I've had in recent years have been in England. There are remarkable chefs, wonderful restaurants, beautiful farm shops, and a growing appreciation for local British ingredients. Yet, Britain seems to wisely have held on to some of its traditions. That proper Sunday roast, Yorkshire pudding, a cozy pub lunch. You still see it. One of the last days of our tour, we went to a place called the Double Red Duke. It was overflowing with families, multi-generational families, and at every table was the Sunday roast, which was incredible. So the food, quite different from France. But I have to say, that's what makes both of them so interesting, and the travel between the two. Observation number 7, gardens matter. And this is a funny one because I don't even have a garden. I don't even have a window box. And quite frankly, if a plant enters my home, its future is generally uncertain. I can do flowers. Plants are a whole nother story. Yet, I spent an entire week touring gardens in the Cotswolds and I attended the Chelsea Flower Show and I loved every minute of it. What surprised me most wasn't the flowers, it was the people. Many of the gardens we toured relied heavily on volunteers. Volunteers, people giving their time simply because they like gardens. Not like, love gardens. To the British, gardening feels less like a hobby and more like a cultural tradition, almost like drinking tea. It's simply part of life. I don't see the same emphasis, I have to say, in Paris, though, in fairness, in France, I spend most of my time in the city rather than the countryside. But what fascinated me is that the gardens themselves seem to reflect the different cultures. French gardens are often organized, structured, precise, symmetrical. The French love symmetry, a bit like the French culture itself, where British gardens feel much more relaxed, a little wild, a little unexpected, stories hidden around corners, paths that invite wandering. Now, neither is better. How could you possibly compare, oh, I don't know, Versailles to Chatsworth? You can't. They're just simply different expressions of what each culture values. And I think that's so cool. It's so interesting, isn't it? Travel has reminded me, in conclusion, that it's always interesting to observe what seems to be most important to a particular culture. What are the non negotiables? What is it that people make time for no matter what? What do they protect? What do they celebrate? And then I think the real question becomes, what about us? Because we all live inside the culture around us, but we also create our own cultures inside our homes. You also see it inside of our friendships, inside of our daily routines. And one of the reasons I love travel so much is that it allows me to borrow ideas from other cultures, not copy them, borrow them. A little more beauty from Paris, a little more conversation from London. It reminds me that our environments impact us far more than we realize. Look around the room where you're currently sitting, and you will see what you appreciate in the culture that you have created around you. What do you so obviously love as you look around? For me, I'm currently in my living room and I see books, I see clocks, I see paintings, I see a combo of the old and the new. I see both France, Paris specifically, and London. So ask yourself, what must be present for you to live the way you want to live? Now, people often ask me, because I'm no spring chicken, as we say here in the United States, they often ask me why I continue to travel and why I return to some of the same places over and over. At this point in my life, it isn't about checking off destinations. It's about observation. I no longer travel simply to see places. I travel to observe people, how they live, how they gather, how they dress, how they spend their summers, how they age. And every time I come home, I bring a little piece of that perspective back with me. So I'd love to know, if you've been to Paris or London, what did you notice? And if you haven't, what surprised you most from today's conversation? Let me know in the comments. I read them all, trust me. And before I go, if you enjoy these kinds of observations, those little things I notice while wandering through London bookshops or sitting in Parisian cafes or trying to figure out why British women can wear a bright pink jacket and somehow look completely elegant, you might enjoy my Substack. Every week, I send out letters from Sharri, which are free. And for paid subscribers, I share something called Notes from the Salon Table, which is a more relaxed, behind the scenes look at life. In that space, we talk about books and cooking and style, travel, beautiful places, and maybe some interesting ideas, kind of whatever happens to be on my mind that week. Think of it sort of like pulling up a chair to the table and continuing the conversation. Now, I didn't have room in this video to tell you about the books I bought at Hatchard's, what surprised me most about the Chelsea Flower Show, or why I packed entirely the wrong clothes for England. Those are the kinds of stories I often share in notes from the salon table. I'll leave a link below if you'd like to join us. Until next time, I'll see you in your next chapter. A bientôt.